Programming Throwdown, episode 83, Teaching Kids to Code. Take it away, Jason.
Hey everybody, so something pretty interesting happened. I knocked over a bottle of Coke, and Coke went absolutely everywhere. This was about a week ago. Completely ruined my keyboard that I bought a long time ago. And so I went on Amazon. I found out the keyboards are way cheaper now. I bought a mechanical keyboard. Actually, I don't know, I bought a mechanical keyboard way back, but either I just forgot or I wasn't paying attention. But basically, there's colors for the switches, and the color doesn't just mean, because at first I was like cherry red and the keyboard's black. It didn't make any sense. But basically, the colors correspond to how the key feels. So if you have cherry red, that's the softest setting. Basically, the softer the keyboard is, kind of, at least in my opinion, the better it feels, but the less you're sort of, let's say, guaranteed to press the button. So, if it's really hard and it makes a big kind of click sound, like I think the blue mechanical switch does this, it makes a big kind of click sound when you press. That to me is kind of annoying, but at least it's like, that you pressed that key. Like there's no in between. So I think there's brown, which is in the middle. I chose cherry red. And I love it. I think it's great. I mean, I haven't had an issue. Actually, it took a little bit of getting used to. So, in the beginning, like sometimes I wouldn't totally hit the key. But at this point now, I haven't had any issues, and I like the way it feels. And it's a lot cheaper. So that's kind of what I'm typing on right now.
So I didn't know for a long time about, I guess they're called mechanical keyboards. I thought, all keyboards are mechanical. But apparently I was wrong, as always. So most keyboards that aren't laptop...
First time ever on the show.
Most keyboards, not like laptop keyboards, but desktop keyboards are, I guess they call it like membrane switches or rubber
That's
dome.
Right.
So it's like a piece of rubber where the bottom of your key has a bit of metal and the PCB underneath has a bit of metal. And when you push down your key, the two pieces of metal touch, and that's what makes the click. And so they're kind of mushy.
But the reason why they're not touching all the time is just you have this piece of rubber, and so when you're pushing, you're squishing the rubber.
Yeah, and I never knew any different. And in fact, I don't think most people do until you go try one of these quote-unquote mechanical keyboards where there's springs and plastic levers and whether or not there's clicking detents or just tactile bump detents. And as Jason said, there's like 6 or 7 different colors, and there's even a community where people open up the switches and change out the springs. So like you can the weight of the key on your reds, you could make it heavier, but you really like the reds, the slidiness of it, and so you could change it to be slightly stiffer or slightly looser in addition to buying a different color to like get it even more customized. And then you can buy like lubricant to sprinkle down in the key so that the keys slide differently. People mod, take the red's stem, it's called, and the blue's clicker or something. I don't know what combinations make sense, and just really mod it up so you can take it to the extreme. And then you can also, with the mechanical keyboards, it tends to be that you can change your key caps. So I didn't know about this either, but my keyboard, the cap actually won't come off the key. And so the thing that has the writing on it, the letter or the number, is attached to the keyboard. You can't pull it off. But on the fancier ones you can, and you can buy replacement ones of varying crazy colors. And there's even people probably know this, I guess, but there's artistic keycaps where you can get little sculpted superheroes or figure eights, Rubik's cubes, whatever, I guess, kinds of things you want. And they can become very expensive, like $7,500, $150 per key, per letter.
What? No way.
Yeah. It's like art collecting, collectible things.
Oh my gosh.
But then in addition, you can buy
107 keys or something.
Well, so that's the other thing is you can buy key sizes down from 40% keyboards, which is approximately 40 keys, to 60% to the normal, I think it's 110 keys is roughly a full-size keyboard, or 10 keyless, which is you drop the numpad stuff off to the right and you end up with about 70 or 80 keys or something.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, the sky's the limit.
And some people who are really crazy actually build their own keyboard.
So this is the rabbit hole I went down. So I wanted a split keyboard. So I want a keyboard where the left and right hand, you can adjust them. So people make fun of me at work because I don't have like a super weird keyboard by normal standards, but it's split, so I have it kind of far apart sometimes, like as much as like a foot apart. And then like when I eat lunch, for instance, I have my food in the middle and the keyboard on either side of my food, like on both sides. And so that's what I really like, and it prevents you from cheating. Like your right finger can't type on the left side because it's really far away.
Oh, that makes sense. Yeah.
So then I learned about this thing called the Dactyl keyboard, Dactyl, which turns out is like a 3D printed case for you to mount these mechanical switches in that you can just buy off the internet. And then you hand wire the switches together with diodes and into a microcontroller. In this case, I used a variant of an Arduino, a very small Arduino, and you put one in each half. And then the left half talks to the right half over serial across a headphone cable, like a 3.5 millimeter cable. And then you plug the USB cable into the one on the right, and it acts as a USB device to make your letters.
Wait, why would you use a headphone cable and not like something easier to program, like I don't know, Ethernet or something?
Well, so the headphone cable connects the two halves because it turns out your computer gets confused if you have two keyboards plugged in. Like it doesn't work well. So you only plug one computer. Sorry, go ahead.
You have to write your own protocol to get.
Well, so there's an open source project that's pretty popular with DIY keyboard people called QMK, that people use to do most of this programming. And then you specify a key map because the keyboard doesn't know what the letters are, and you can literally arrange them in not infinite but very large variety of key combinations, and so you tell it which key corresponds to what letter. So you can do things like Colmac or Dvorak keyboards in addition to the normal QWERTY keys. You can also adjust what the thumb, on this one there's thumb clusters, so the letters your thumb can type, and like space and backspace are like on opposite sides on your thumbs. Another popular one is the ErgoDox, is a keyboard that's similar to this. Anyway, so there's like the amount of customization goes through the roof. And it's actually a pretty big learning curve because there's also layers. So you can sort of have a button that you push and all of the keys become that they do something else. And the whole keyboard, you sort of raise up a layer or lower a layer. And then you have modifiers. So like there's no arrow keys. So you might raise up a layer and then your arrow keys are on the, WASD or, I don't know, UHJK. You just make it whatever you want. And so the amount of customization goes up and you have to get kind of used to it. So I built one of these and was using it for a while, but I couldn't get over the learning curve. So now it sits unused. But interestingly enough, there's, if you look this up, the guy who made it made a video. And if you're into 3D printing, which we talked about a while, there's a thing called OpenSCAD, which is a way to generate the STL, which is sort of the watertight mesh, the triangles that you feed to a 3D printer to 3D print an object. You can describe that from primitives, sort of like if you've ever used, what was the name of one of some of the, like POV ray, was it? One of the ray tracers where you sort of describe a scene. It's very much like that, in sort of this very simple programming language. So he didn't like that. So what he did was write in Clojure a way to generate OpenSCAD, which then you run to generate the STLs, and then you print. So you can actually like add rows or columns to the keyboard, and the keyboard becomes sort of like programmatically defined.
Wow. So you 3D printed the base of the keyboard.
The case. Mm-hmm.
You bought a bunch of like key tops or keys, I guess.
Key caps. Yeah.
And then you bought the mechanical switches.
Yes.
And you soldered it all together.
Yes, with like wires. Yeah.
And so is this what you use every day?
No, so I couldn't get over the learning curve of it. It was too custom.
Oh, I see. But if you had made one that was so what was hard about it?
So I don't know if you look at the pictures. So for this one, it's that the things you would normally do kind of like with your pinkies, like the backspace, delete or whatever, and the tabs like become on your thumbs. So like the shifts aren't with your pinkies, they become with your thumbs.
Yeah, so for people who like are listening to this, which is almost everybody, basically like imagine, if you took a keyboard and you kind of broke it into like four pieces, and there's a piece for each of your what's the word for this? There's a piece for each of your opposable thumbs. That's two pieces. And then there's a piece for each of the rest of of each of your hands, what's left over. So you have these 4 pieces, and you have these 2 kind of little squares for your opposable thumbs that kind of hang on to the rest of to either side of the keyboard. Yeah, and I can imagine that's really hard to get used to.
Yeah. So my friend has one of the Ergo Docks, which is the same thing as this, but basically like pushed down flat. So without the curviness. So if you took this whole thing and like flattened it down, and that was pretty popular. He has that one, and it took him probably like 2 solid weeks, and he was a much better typist than I am. I'm a terrible typist, actually. Is that the right word for that? Oh, well. And so he got...
It's got good alliteration.
Good, there we go. Terrifically terrible typist Patrick was typing terrifically terribly one day. That sounds like a typing test.
That's right.
So it's like flattened, and it's called the Ergo Dock. So he got one of these keyboards. His was pre-made, but he learned to type on it, and it took him a solid like 2 weeks to even become like passable at it. And then he was telling me the other day, he's like, yeah, I think I kind of just want to go back to using a normal keyboard. Like he still feels like he doesn't, he is not as comfortable to him. Like he still occasionally makes mistakes. So I think it's one of those things that either jives with you or it doesn't, but I don't know how you try it without trying it. Like you have to have it at your desk, commit to it, try to use it, and then decide if you like it or not. And in this case, for me, the experience was fun, and having built it, it worked, it was great, and I just didn't end up wanting to use it.
Yeah, but I think if you built one that was a little bit more traditional, you could use it every day.
So that's my new project.
Would it ever be comfortable enough where you could use it every day?
Oh, I think so.
Could it ever be comparable to?
Yeah. People use it's similar, I guess, idea that this Kinesis. There's this Kinesis keyboard, which has been.
Oh yeah, there's a buddy at work who has that.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar to that. I think it's a similar idea strain. Yeah.
So this would be really cool. Like if you are a developer, you could totally build your own keyboard with one of these cheap 3D printers, or you could do the thing where you 3D print it and they mail it to you, and you could bring in your homemade keyboard and do all your development on that. That would be some serious street cred.
I mean, that's basically, I think this guy has like a video where he talks about this. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like if you really need that promotion at work, you want to find out how to take it to the next level.
Jason's contention is this is like instant promotion material. I'm not sure I agree.
Instant promotion, guaranteed.
Ooh.
Your boss just walks by and he's like, turns to your person next to you. Hey, did you finish that report? Blah, blah, blah. And he walks by your desk and he's like, have I given you that promotion yet?
I think this is how you move from being like, oh, I was a kid who was picked on in high school, to like, oh, a lot of people at work are like me. Oh, nope, I'm back to being picked on again.
Oh, my goodness.
I'll have to tell you one day the time when I sat in a tent at work where I installed a tent over my computer monitor.
What?
No, we have to keep going.
Okay, we'll have to do that next show. That sounds bizarre. All right.
It was logical, I promise. All right, the Nebraska problem. So This is an article that's actually quite old, from 2014, but the game The Witness, which was written by, why is his name escaping me? It just escaped me.
Oh, Jonathan Blow.
Thank you. So it's not by him. Though that is the guy who made The Witness, but he had like other people helping him. This is by, I think it's one of the people who helped him out on it. He worked on it. I haven't dug quite into it. Casey Muratori. But anyway, so for some reason this got linked a while ago, and I sort of kept it in my backlog and didn't lose all my bookmarks. And so I had this, and he's going through in this article basically ways of putting down clumps of grass. Which you're like, oh, Patrick, why do we care? Like, this is a programming podcast, and we're now how long into the podcast, and we've not talked about programming. So he's talking about randomly choosing locations to put down grass. And one of the things he points out, it comes up again and again, which is why I want to talk about this, is that randomness is actually pretty hard. So both for reasons of, like, we're not going to get into, and quantum physics and what is truly random, and that most of the time what we call random is pseudo-random. I'm not talking about that. I mean, although those things are interesting and would love to talk about them. Just from the fact that if you say he wanted to put down clumps of grass, and if you just randomly, uniformly sample the space, pseudo-randomly sample the space, you end up with clumps in some areas and gaps in other areas, which actually, although might be truly random, looks bad. It doesn't look natural because grass doesn't end up being truly randomly distributed that way. And so you have some
Right.
areas where it's dense and some areas where it's not. So now you
Yeah, I
need
mean,
to
there's a natural process where grass is spreading and dying, right?
So what he's trying to do is, I don't know that he's per se seeking the biological defendable way of grass to be laid out in a field, but he's showing how to do random sampling with, is that called, like Poisson distribution or something, where you're trying to like sample a set distance away from other plants, so you're more likely to spawn where in an area where there are no plants than in an area
That
with
makes
other
sense.
plants.
Yeah.
And then also you could increase the number of plants per area, like the density in total. But all of this still leads to gaps, and he goes down to trying various methods and how to choose. And what he comes up with is goes on this deep dive and talks about how he acknowledges this is a deep dive, but it becomes this burning question in his mind. And what he kind of figures out is actually he doesn't want something truly random. What he finds out is that by choosing a pattern which is complex enough but has certain properties, he can get what he wants, which is that when you're looking at it from sort of eye level out towards a horizon, he can get it where there's no gaps and that it's not clear that it's a pattern, but yet it is, and you can use less features, less of these plants, and get the same effect. And all of that to say that his quote unquote random sampling in the end is actually that he said he's probably not going to end up implementing it, but that was this, he called it staggered concentric intersections, where it just sort of like this pattern with certain properties allowed him to cover the space in a way that was actually better than the truly just random distribution. And this comes up and came up actually at work, where we kind of ran into this. People were trying to test some stuff and they were using just truly random tests. But what they were turning out is they weren't getting sort of great coverage. And what they didn't want was random sampling of the parameters. What you actually wanted was some sort of preset coverage, so you could kind of guarantee that you covered as much as the input space as you can. So given that, hey, you're only going to be able to run 100 tests, how do you pick the 100 tests so that you get the most coverage possible instead of having risks of getting them clumped together?
Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, like if some input is almost always 2 or something like that, but it has a range of 0 to 100, you don't want to waste a lot of time trying things that are way out there.
Well, so yeah, that would be
like how if you have this grass that's in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, so that would be like the reversing, or the other way around is saying like, hey, you want to make sure that this is well behaved. You get different behavior across 0 to 100, but if you just pick 10 random samples, like you're going to get giant gaps most likely. Versus what you could do is sample, if you have to sample 0 to 100, you could do 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. You could evenly space them and at least try to cover more of the area, and the size of the gaps you have is going to be smaller. And so there's a trade here. Without knowing what you're trying to solve, you can't say a priori, hey, it's always better to random, or it's somewhere in the middle. You want something that's random-ish, but what you don't want is probably truly random, because truly random, you're going to end up with these gaps, these areas that aren't covered.
That makes sense. Yeah, there's something like this in machine learning. I can't remember the term. I think it's actually from statistics. It's called pseudo-random, but it's kind of overloading the term. But basically, it's a random number, but you take as a prior the past numbers, and so there's a penalty for being close to one of the past numbers, and so it's like this biased random number generator where it's more likely to generate a number that's far away from all the numbers it's generated in the past.
Yeah,
it's meant for like if you had say 2 dimensions, it'll try to generate a point that's far away from the other points, but then it'll make one random. So it's like a combination of those 2 objectives.
Yeah. So anyways, interesting read, and random is hard.
Yeah, there's lots of random. So if you want to implement pseudo-random numbers, you could do that in PyTorch. And PyTorch 1.0 came out in the past, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago. But basically, TensorFlow is super, super popular. A lot of people are using TensorFlow, and TensorFlow is great. PyTorch, learned a lot of lessons from TensorFlow. And one of the things that PyTorch does really well is they have an immediate mode, and then they have sort of a static mode. So the idea is, if you remember, if you have compiled languages and interpreted languages, right? compiled languages are generally faster because they can sort of look ahead, see sort of what's going to happen, or they can analyze the entire file, take their time to try to optimize it, and do all of that before you run it. Versus an interpreted code, in theory, you could be kind of rewriting the code even as you're going along and things like that. So you don't have the same assumptions. And so it's in machine learning, you have sort of a similar concept where you have dynamic computation graphs or static computation graphs. And as you would expect, if you have a static computation graph, it's going to go much faster because, for example, if there's some intermediate result that you're not using, let's say you have, z equals x plus y, but you're not printing z or really doing anything with z, maybe you calculated it by accident or you deleted some other code that was using it. It just will skip that line. It says, oh, I don't need z, so boom, it's gone, right? So that's a pretty extreme example. But even if you're writing your code in a way where you're using everything, it's still much faster. It'll do all sorts of nice things there. But there are times where you need the dynamic graph. So specifically, when you're trying to improve a model, like you're trying to have it train and learn and get better, that's when you typically need a dynamic graph because you have to sort of react. It's like, let's say the model is really good, so you just want to stop training, right? Or let's say at the beginning of training, you want to do something, and then over time, you want to switch to something else, right? So that's when a dynamic graph is really useful. And also a dynamic graph is easier to debug because it's dynamic, you can stop it at any time. And so you can do all of that and then say, okay, now I'm good with this. I want to switch to the static graph and get the speed. And so I think TensorFlow 3, I want to say, is going to have this as well. So, it's one of these things where, everyone's learning from each other. If you have a huge project in TensorFlow, I probably wouldn't rewrite it. But PyTorch is super nice. If you're starting from scratch, PyTorch would definitely be the way to go, at least right now. And, the 1.0 release came out, which really means that, they have good documentation and all of that. So check it out.
Switching gears completely, don't have a good segue, is the Cosmic Ladder. So again, this is not really news, but this was a very interesting thing for me, so I thought I'd share it, that somehow this came up. What were we talking about? Something, and I did some research and found out how do you tell how far away something is in space? So it turns out a lot of people think they know, and most people don't. So most people probably don't care, to be fair. But most...
actually, I have no idea. I mean, I guess you have to do it based on the movement, right?
Yes. Okay, so this is what most engineers end up guessing, is that I'll say what you're saying is parallax, which is if you know that the Earth is moving and you see how things are moving relative to each other, you can, sort of use trigonometry, roughly, and tell how far away something is.
Yeah, right.
Sure. But it turns out that only works out to a kind of a certain distance. Because other things are just, I think it's roughly 10 to the 24 miles away or something. It basically breaks down, right? You end up with your noise and your measurement is so big that you can't get useful information about how things orders of magnitude further away end up still tiny in your computation. And so the Cosmic Ladder is a term that has a Wikipedia entry and everything, but the link I'll give here is by a person named Terry Tao, and I have no idea their pedigree as an astronomer, but they have a pretty cool presentation in PDF and PowerPoint slide about essentially climbing the ladder, and it takes you through the history and sort of the techniques, at least it was straightforward to understand or make me think I understand how it works, about how that you're able to measure things on Earth, figure out how far away the moon is, for instance. Well, first, how big is the Earth? How did they even figure out how big the Earth was? Once you figure out how big the Earth is, you can make an estimate of how far away the moon is by sort of measuring various things. I won't recite because I'll mess them up. Then as you get better, now we can tell how big the moon is because we can use radar systems to measure how far away it is and reference it to things on the ground. And we get better and we can see how the first initial guesses, how close or bad they were. Then to about 100 light years away, you can use what Jason was sort of saying by like movement around the sun. You can use sort of parallax. But what do you use for things that are like 10 to the 5 light years away? You have to use various fitting techniques to things which you believe have constantness. So if you imagine, and I might mess these up. So as you start going far away, you sort of saying, hey, it is repeatable that when a supernova occurs, that a supernova has a set brightness. So if I observe this, and this isn't exactly true, I'm waving my hands a lot. If I know a supernova has a set brightness, then if I see a supernova and I measure how bright it is, then I know how far away it is. And so by having a predictive model of how two things, like how two binary dwarf stars orbit each other, how fast that should happen, and then by measuring, how far apart they are, how big they are, I can tell how far away they are. You can start to use periods of movement, these kinds of things, to try to guess how far away things are. And he's essentially talking about how that once you can measure things a little further away, then you can use those things to measure the things further away. And you can sort of walk your way up the ladder. And to me, it was just like, whoa,
wow, that's so
never
cool.
really thought about it, that like some of these phenomenon are predicted by current physics of occurring in a set way. Like certain stars will implode based on their mass and size, and therefore you can predict their brightness. And as we get better at understanding those predictions, then we can use them to sort of measure how far away they are.
Wow, that's amazing. That reminds me.
Yeah, go ahead.
I hope this isn't like totally off topic, but I think it's similar. You know how they measure? I always wondered how they measure the weight of really small things. Like,
okay.
For example, how do you measure the mass of a quark?
Okay.
Right? And it turns out it's actually similar. So they, you can't obviously put a quark on a scale or anything like that. But what you can do is you can see what happens when a quark runs into something. And so you can see what happens when it bumps into something bigger than it. And then you can kind of see what happens when those things bump into something else, so on and so forth. And you can walk that sort of ladder backwards from something that is, just big enough where you can weigh it, and then looking at how the dynamics change when it collides into something smaller, and you keep walking that ladder down until you get to a quark. And they actually use that same technique as you described to measure the mass of a quark.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, very
so
cool.
I probably did a terrible job. If there's any astronomers in the audience, I'm sorry. But I found this interesting, and it turns out I'm not claiming what I said was, more correct. You should go read about it. But yeah, so it was surprising to me how much I didn't know about how distances were measured. I guess like Jason was saying, I never thought about how you would measure the weight of a quark. But I guess it makes sense. I guess the mass, you measure it by bouncing it off other stuff and seeing how much it affects it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, people are probably groaning.
Cool. No, I thought that was actually one of the better, more interesting news stories we've had. So mine is much more straightforward and practical. It's an article on how to develop a boilerplate REST API. And so I actually found this because I was trying to do this. And I've done this before, so I was really just looking for, a more recent version of this. And I went through a few of them. I was actually really happy with this one. And basically, I wanted to spin up a really simple website. And I wanted it to just have a few calls. People would call it with a few different URLs, and it would just spit back some JSON data. And so I wanted something very simple that could do that. It was going to talk to a database that had data from another program, and I was really interested in that other program. So I want something quick, easy, low maintenance. And whenever I need something like this, I always turn to Express.js. I like it because it's Node.js. It's pretty easy to use. If I want to access it from a browser and do some client-side stuff, that's also going to be in JavaScript, so that's convenient. And the biggest thing is I wanted it to be kind of ready to go. I basically wanted it to bootstrap this app and get it to a point where I can just create a URL handle for get and post and just put what I need in there and launch it. And this website actually goes in good detail about, there's a thing called, there's actually a binary called Express from the Express.js team. and you pass some commands, some switches to it, and it just builds a whole website from nothing. And it talks about kind of what those switches do, because if you set different ones, your website's gonna look a little different. So yeah, check that out. It kind of covers everything in good detail. So
Time for book of the show.
book of the show. My book of the show is Enlightenment Now by Steven Pinker. It's pretty cool. It covers, as it suggests, the Enlightenment period, and it talks about how it actually kind of frames the current day as a second Enlightenment. So I'm not going to go through the whole book. It's a pretty long book. I'm not going to spoil the ending, although it's a historical book, so you're kind of living the ending. But the idea is you had the Dark Ages. A lot of works of knowledge were lost. They were either burned or the people carrying them fled out of Europe. And then you talk about the Enlightenment, where all of this knowledge was restored, and really people's perception changed. Actually, one of the things that I found really fascinating is they talk about the difference before and after the Enlightenment in terms of what people believed. So, for example, people believed before the Enlightenment that if you, let's say, killed someone with a knife, and you brought that knife, later on, even years later, to the body or the grave of the person, that the person would bleed. So in other words, like you kill someone with a knife, and 2 weeks later, if you brought the knife to the person, to their corpse, the corpse would start bleeding. And that's how you could tell, who is guilty, like who did it. Like spontaneously bleed. And that was just one thing. But basically, people, they believed alchemy, right? That like you could turn metal to gold.
Wait, but that's true.
Know how. It is supernova maybe or something. But yeah, people believed just unbelievable things. We've all heard about like that maggots, are created in meat, things like that. Like, and just he lists off all these things that people believed, and they're all just, ridiculous kind of superstition, right? They're just perversions of nature. And then he just says, and in 50 or 100 years later, all of that is gone. Like people just, would look at you like you're crazy, like they would now if you said any of these things. And just what an enormous transformation that was. And he talks about basically how we've been going through just enormous transformations ever since the Enlightenment. And I thought it was a fascinating book. I'm still about halfway through it. The one thing I'll say is I don't think Steven Pinker is a good writer. So he has amazing TED Talks. I feel like his writing quality is very poor, to be completely honest. I would say in about 10 or 20% of the sentences, he puts a string of about 8 or 10 adjectives. And I'm not even kidding. It's like, we thought that we were in the dark, gloomy, like despot, blah, 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 blah era. But now we're in the blah, blah, and like so many adjectives. And it was almost like it became kind of like a joke where I started counting all the adjectives. So yeah, you have to sort of get past the writing in a sense. But the content I felt like was really fascinating. And I would still, even knowing that, I would still read it again, like if I wasn't already halfway through it.
My book will probably not enlighten you. It is a fiction book, The Bands of Mourning, which is a Brandon Sanderson novel who I recommend. I feel like I think he released a lot of books, and I have been sort of catching up on them versus a lot of authors I am caught up on. So I feel like his name gets brought up a bunch. It's not that I wish I had other stuff. I've just been reading a lot of more parts of series. And so since I like Brandon Sanderson so much and constantly try to tell people how they should read Brandon Sanderson books, I will say that this is the third book in the second trilogy of this sort of like part of his universe. So book 6 or whatever. And I think there's one more in this trilogy, which is set sort of at a later date from the first trilogy in this part. But it's in the Mistborn series. And so it's related to those books. Can't say a lot because it's the 6th book. so
Sure.
it will just spoil literally everything. So I can't talk about it. But if you have not heard me say how amazing Brandon Sanderson is amazing, and go read his books.
Cool.
The first Mistborn is good to start with, and I don't know if you want recommendations. I'm not on social media, but Jason can tell me, people are asking. But also, I mean, I think there's plenty of guides just like where to start Brandon Sanderson. I'm also reading his Stormlight Archives is another series he's writing. He's a very, you say like prolific, is that the right word? Yeah, I guess prolific writer. He writes a lot. Like he comes out with a lot of books, and like very big books. And I have no idea how other writers, which I won't name, seem to struggle like getting their series done or coming out with their next book. This guy just burns through them. I think maybe it's just like what do you call it? It's like a machine learned writer. Like it's just like a Markov process, and he just like it's just randomly generating the sentences for him. But he's like the world's best trainer of a Markov process, and he's just like, yeah, I don't care if it is. I don't even care.
I wonder if what's actually happening is he's got a team of people who really help him, and he is at the, he's orchestrating it, but other people are maybe filling in some of the thematic points or something. I don't know.
It could be. I mean, I don't think so. So I was trying to think I think we were talking about how, I thought I knew how to measure how far away stars were. It turns out I didn't. I think if you actually sit down and calculate the amount of time it takes to write even 1,000-page book, like just write the words if you worked on it each day for a few hours,
right,
is not that long. I don't think.
I thought you were going to say it's very long.
No, I think it's
to write a 1,000-page book. How many words are on a page? Like roughly 200, I think?
Do this on the air. I should have come prepared.
So let's say to write 200 words, I think it's going to take you, I feel like it would take 1,000 hours to write a 1,000-page book.
So it says it's about 250 to 300 pages per word, or per page, 250 words per page.
Yeah. So I would say about 1,000 hours just to write it. Assuming let's say you were just copying
you think,
from another book,
no.
right? Like what's your words per minute when you type?
Oh, really bad. I told you I'm a terrible typist.
So let's say your words per minute is 50. Then that would be 5 minutes. Yeah, that's not very. Yeah, okay. Copying would definitely be faster than that.
Okay, well, whatever he writes really fast. I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, I mean, it's that. Either way, it sounds remarkable that he can get that much done.
So about 5 minutes per page, about 5,000 minutes. Is that right? Yeah, 5,000 minutes. So
yeah, so you could knock it out in a few weeks if you're just copying.
So my guess is it probably takes him like three-ish months, let's say, or whatever, 4-ish months to write it. If you write a good solid chunk every day and you know where you're going, and then he can do them in parallel. So if he has people, like you point out, not help him write, but help him do the editing. Like he writes the rough cut and has a lot of good people to help him proofread and edit it, then you could sort of do 2 or 3 books per year. I just think a lot of authors, there's they do book tours. It's like a whole process getting in a groove. You see this with musicians. Like I always think about this. Musicians come out with albums like once every couple years, if that. But how long does it really take to make an album? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean it's basically 2 or 3 weeks to make the album, but then you're on tour playing the same song in every city for 2 years.
But you're on tour playing the same, but you're only doing that a couple hours a day, right?
Or what's that?
I said you're only playing a couple hours a day for your concerts, though.
Yeah, right. Yeah, the concerts you're just reciting. You're not actually making music.
Yeah. Basically, I just don't understand creative work, I guess.
Yeah, it's mind-boggling that somebody can produce that much content.
So meanwhile, I write a few lines of code a day, and that's it. Maybe.
Yeah, when I hear about these indie game developers who do everything themselves, they do all the art, they write all the dialogue, they do everything themselves.
Yeah,
it just boggles my mind. They also take they also take a long time to make the game.
That's true, but not always. Right. You ever? What's the name of that jam? The Code Jam. They do it in a day.
Oh yeah, Ludum Dare.
And some of those games are pretty cool. They're not
true
AAA titles, but
it's true. They have a good mechanic, and then they can always kind of write the game around that. All right, if you want to read about Brendan Sorensen. Did I say that
Brandon
right?
Sanderson.
Brandon Sanderson or Steven Pinker. You can do it on Audible. I actually listened to Enlightenment Now on Audible, and I listened to a couple of other books. I wouldn't really put them as book of the show. I was running a bit behind in the sense that I was accumulating some credits on Audible. And so I got a couple of lighthearted books. And so actually, I'll make a book of the show next time. But I got a couple of comedy books, and I got a couple of serious books. And I've been really doubling down on the Audible. It's been a lot of fun.
Nice. Yep.
Yeah, if you don't want to support us on Audible, if you already have an Audible account, or you just want to find a different way to support the show, we are on Patreon. If you donate, I think it's as little as $1. I don't think they'll let you donate fractions of $1, but no matter what you donate, you get all the benefits. So you get the RSS feed, which is much faster than the default RSS feed. Like the download rate is much higher. And you get to be in the raffle, which is coming up. So this Christmas, last Christmas, we gave out laser printed programming throwdown logos and some T-shirts. This Christmas, we'll give out some more T-shirts, and we'll have to figure out what we're gonna do for all the Patreon folks. We'll try and do something a little different this year. But you'll get involved in that. You'll be raffled in the raffle for a T-shirt. And we'll try and get something to everybody. Check us out on Patreon.
Time for
And with that,
tools of the show.
tools of the show. My tool of the show is Quip. So Quip is pretty cool. If you've ever used a Google Doc, and you've done it in a collaborative way where you and someone else are both writing in the same doc, then you've basically used Quip. So it's very similar. The big thing about Quip is it's better for kind of, let's say, group projects. So it has folders, although I guess now Google Docs has a lot of the same features. But Quip is very sort of compartmentalized. So you can have, a whole Quip kind of group for, let's say you're working on a book or something like that with a group of people. You can all be in the same sort of Quip server, and it kind of keeps things organized like that. You can share things, you can collaborate. We use it at work. It's actually really nice. And also, if you're doing anything sort of like private, you can actually host Quip. Like, I think it costs money, but you can host Quip yourself. It's like you can buy a license and all of that. If you don't want to use Google Docs for like your business or something like that. But yeah, we've been, I use it almost every day, and it works really well. What is your tool of the show?
Oh, my tool of the show is a game. Surprise. Don't do useful work. It's Stardew Valley, which has been out for a while. And I think we may have even talked about it. I don't know that it's ever been the tool of the show, but we may have talked about it before. But it recently came out on, I believe, both iOS and Android. I always mean to look this up, and I forgot. So yes, it is both iOS and Android.
Way.
Yeah.
No,
so iOS is out
check
now.
out.
Android is coming out, it says.
Cool.
So I've been playing this. Android release date is, I'm going to scan this while we talk. Pop over, die.
So yeah, basically Stardew Valley is actually one of these games that was created by just one person. They did all the dialogue, they did all the art, everything. But it took that person literally I think 7 years to make that game.
Oh, wow.
Unbelievable level of effort.
I didn't realize that. Yeah, so yeah. I can't tell if it's out or not on Android. Someone with an Android phone will have to check. But it is on the App Store. I've been playing on my iPad. I don't know how it would play on an iPhone. But on an iPad, it's pretty good. It's one of those things where I always feel I'm just going to play it for a few more. Oh, there goes an hour.
Yeah. Well, the thing about Stardew Valley is, basically just to recap, is you're kind of like a farmer. But some of the sort of ingredients, more advanced things, you have to go into dangerous places. So you're like a farmer and a soldier at the same time. And the game can only save at night. So basically you do a bunch of things, and then during the day you get so tired from doing these things that you have to go to sleep. Or maybe you don't get that tired, but at nighttime you're forced to go to sleep. But then it's like, the moment the game saves is the moment when you have something to do. It's like, oh, now I have all this energy, and the game just saved. And it's like when you don't have any energy and you're really ready to call it a night, that's when you you can't really save. You have to wait until the night's over. So anyways, I'm kind of messing this up, but basically the way they do this save really kind of keeps you playing. That's a great hook.
Yeah, I mean, I think said another way, when you wake up first thing in the morning, it's a new day, but that means you need to do all the day's chores. Like, you have to make sure all your plants are watered. You need to go take care of stuff. So when you have the most energy, you have the most things you need to do. And then by the end of the day, you run out of energy, but you can't get new one without ending the day and having to go spend your energy again. So you can try to cook yourself meals or do other things to restore your energy. But yeah, as Jason's pointing out, mostly you have a set number of things you need to do and then a bunch of the optional things. And turns out it's kind of like real life. You have more things that you need or want to do during the day than you have energy to do or time to get done.
Yeah, I mean, put it another way. I'll take it a second.
Oh, here we go. We're going to just go round and around.
The most exciting part of the game happens right after you save. That's maybe a better way of saying what I was trying to say earlier. So it's like, as soon as you save, as soon as the game saves, you have all these things you need to do, and they're all really fulfilling. It's like, oh, I have a plant that's ready for a harvest, and I have a new like set of grapes or something like that. It's like the coolest stuff in the game is always right after you save. And so once you've done that cool stuff, then you're kind of stuck until you don't want to waste the rest of the day. So you're stuck until it saves. And then right when it saves, there's something else cool to do.
Yeah. So I mean, I enjoy, there's the new trend, which this game has been out for a while, but it's just coming to mobile or to iOS and Android. And I don't know how all those are mobile anymore. Anyways, but is that it's open world without being too much to do. So there's always something simple you can do. There's enough story where it's trying to push you like, hey, go check this out or go check that out. The trend in open world games seems to be a lot like, do anything you want. And then that just makes me not want to do anything at all.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Well, it's just directed enough. Cool. All right. So on to the topic. The topic is teaching kids to code. And there's a lot going on here. Actually, we should preface this by saying, why we're an authority on this. Or why would you even listen to us talk about this? So don't. That's pretty nihilistic.
Thank you.
Yeah, so basically, so we have, I think, relatively different background. Maybe not that different. So your dad was also a coder,
yes,
right? In my case, my dad was an engineer. I wasn't really a coder, but my aunt was a software engineer. So we definitely both kind of had it in the family in a sense. And we can talk about, I guess, how our family got us into coding, or at least how our family was part of that. And then now we also have kids. Your kids are probably too young to really do a lot of coding. I mean, mine definitely are. But do your kids do any coding?
No, so they don't do coding yet. My older daughter has wanted to, she calls it like have computer lessons. But it turns out the thing that at least I never think about, is how much it requires reading. So if your kid can't actually like read at a significant level, it's pretty hard to get them to sort of do some fundamental things on the computer. So like anytime there's an error message pop up, they don't know what it says.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so our kids are still too young, but we could talk about, I guess that's actually when it's most interesting, right? Because I mean, if someone is like 18 or something, then it's or that's a bad example. If someone's like, I don't know, 14, then maybe it's the same instructions as if they were 18, right?
Yeah. But I mean, I do say that I think my kids have begun to engage on things where, for me, like the teaching them to code is not so much about like in a programming language, but I guess teaching them things which are, I guess I take for granted, but are not always immediately obvious to people, like describing a sequence of events unambiguously to be done. And so doing exercises where I'm like, we're going to play a game, and then trying to have them like, let's say what you want done, but then, oh wait, what you said was ambiguous and therefore can be executed in lots of ways. Or playing board games or what if experiments with them and having them try to think like why something happened. And it's like, I know you could just try this or do this in this video game we're playing, but why not? What do you think will happen? Like, let's not just go mash the button until the door opens. Like, what thing do you think we could do that would open the door in this game? And trying to have them think about like sort of cause and effect when even we're doing other tasks, because I think that's something that a lot of gets missed, which is a lot of stuff gets missed, which is people just sort of bang their way through games or playing stuff until it works, but trying to anticipate, like, if I do this action, that thing's going to happen. And I guess it's almost about teaching a kid how to debug before teaching them to program. But I spend a lot of time
totally
doing that
makes
with
sense.
my kids.
Yeah, I mean, I play a lot of board games with my son too, and I think my parents also played a lot of board games with me. We used to play Monopoly and stuff like that. And the interesting thing about board games is there are some things in board games you can control, and there are some things you can't. And I think that as an adult, it's kind of obvious, but as a kid, I think that that's a really kind of important thing to learn. Like if if your parents like always get bad rolls on Monopoly and they end up with no properties and they lose, a lot of kids think their parents are kind of superheroes, right? So it's like where you see your parents fail, you kind of see like, oh, okay, that was kind of randomness. My dad go to jail 3 times in a row or something like that, and he's, frustrated about it or whatever, and then he loses. It's like, okay, that was something you couldn't control, but not putting houses anywhere, that caused me to lose, and I could have just put houses. You know what I mean? So like as you said, the cause and effect, and also more like the framing, like understanding the where you have sort of control and where things are happening outside of your control, and being able to disambiguate those two, like pulling the signal from the noise.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, I think actually we interviewed Mark Engelberg a while back, and he people should definitely check that interview out. It was fascinating. But he actually made several games and puzzles and things like that. And so I think that's a great way to get started is by checking out board games. Like when I was a kid, I didn't really know of any. I'm sure they existed, but I didn't really know of any sort of educational board games. We mostly just played Monopoly. We played Sorry. We played just just adult board games. Actually, I do remember playing Chutes and Ladders and things like that too. But now, I mean, there's games for kids, and to some extent games for adults that are way better. Like they're better balanced. They like kind of teach you more. And so Think Fun, has put out some really fantastic games, and they're actually coming out with I think a couple of new games. I saw on their website they're coming out with Potato Pirates, which is a game for like 7 and up, and they're coming out with some game called Hacker for 10 and up. And I haven't had a chance to really play those yet, or I don't think they're out yet. But there's educational games I think are really nice.
So the games that Mark built, and like this Robot Turtles and stuff, what it taught me is like when playing with my kids, the thing that's interesting is having them learn, which at first I didn't get, but when you say go left, they think about like I'm viewing the board, the thing is going to go to my left. And it's like, no, it's executing from some other point of view. So like I'm moving this robot forward. So in Robot Turtle, I mean, there's lots of things. Roughly, you're describing some sequence of actions you want it to take, like go straight, rotate left, go straight. And this, like when you're in an area and teachers like teaching the kids the context in which something runs, which to me at first was like, they're having struggles with this and this doesn't seem related to programming. But I've come around to actually thinking that programming is about putting yourself in the context of the code running, which is the things around you when you run matter a lot. So if I add 1 to a number when the number's 10, it becomes 11, not going from 0 to 1 or whatever. Understanding, keeping in mind what the current state is. And so like looking at visually at the board and saying, hey, the turtle is currently facing to the left. If I have it turn left, it's not going to go to my left, it's going to go down. Yep. And to me, it's totally. This is obvious, right? Like, oh, this is easy. But to a kid, like wrapping yourself up in, I need to put myself in its shoes or into the context of where the program is at, where it's running, and then having a kid be able to walk back to where it went wrong is actually pretty useful. And as Jason pointed out, I mean, as far as like becoming an expert on it, I mean, TBD, we'll see. Like, I don't know if it'll help my kids because I never played these kind of games growing up, but it is interesting to play them with the kids.
So what did you do? Because if you weren't playing board games, then what were you doing?
So slightly older than that, but I think once I was in later elementary and early middle school, we had programming books and compilers on my computer, programming books around the house and compilers on the computer. And so I taught myself sort of how to use QBasic by reading the book. And I like if I had got stuck or had a problem, I'd get my dad to help me or whatever, which he would to some extent. Although I guess now his mindset was probably like, I did this all day. I don't want to come home and do this with my kid. Like I can't blame him. So we didn't do it for like hours upon end. But I would try to make rudimentary like drawing programs in QBasic, like, oh, I'm going to make Pac-Man, and I would try to like make the little circle mouth open and close by sort of trying to figure out how, like, oh, I found some code for drawing a circle. Cool. Now I can like translate the circle. Like, how do I open the circle to like have the mouth like chomp? And I didn't know about sprites or like, so I would like try to find little math equations that would draw it on the board in various ways. And so I would start with that kind of stuff. And then also eventually, like when I was in, I guess, high school, I learned C. That would have been like 10th and 11th grade. But when I was in middle school, mostly like goofing around like on QBasic and trying stuff in that, getting it to, print funny messages out, make little goofy things. And in middle school, actually on my calculator, like I would always program, I guess it was some form of BASIC on the calculator. And
TI Basic.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I like TI Basic, and I would do wrote like a little RPG for myself where I would like randomly choose a number and attack monsters, and if you success, you would get gold, and if you like got attacked,
no
you
way,
would
I
lose
did
HP.
exactly the same thing.
I think the like text-based adventure is like just interesting enough without running into like becoming too complicated too fast, where you have spaghetti code and you can't manage the sort of game state. And so I think it makes a lot of sense. And so, yeah, I would program. And then if you beat the final, I think there was like 10 bad guys, it would draw little animated fireworks on the screen by drawing random line segments and connecting them.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I have a somewhat similar story. Like, as I said, my parents weren't like software engineers or anything like that, so they couldn't really, there wasn't really any resources like that. But I did get I got an Atari 800, and it came with this program called Delta Drawing. That was basically turtle graphics. So you have a little arrow, and you could, draw forward, you could turn right, turn left, and it kind of taught me about like egocentric, movement and all of that. And the Delta Drawing book had a bunch of recipes, so I would just punch in like literally what it said and hit go, and then I'd get a car or something like that. Like it's amazing drawing that like I could never make by myself, but if I just follow the recipe, it would make a car. And then also like when you messed up in the recipe, you'd get like a car, but the wheel would be just totally in the wrong place. And so you could kind of look and see, oh, this is what I did wrong, and this is how it affected the car, So yeah, I kind of got really into Delta Drawing and doing a lot of that. My aunt was a software engineer, and she got me a computer and kind of walked me through BASIC and things like that. I don't think I did too much with BASIC. I made a game that my cousins and I played where it was called Arm Wrestling, and basically you had to hit the space bar so many times per second, or maybe it was per 10 seconds or something. And every time you pass that threshold, so every 10 seconds you pass the threshold, you started winning. And if you won 3 in a row, then you won the arm wrestling. And we broke the space bar on the keyboard.
So that's pretty cool. And then you broke.
Yeah, and this was back like at the Atari, where the keyboard was like basically you couldn't detach it or anything. So we basically broke the Atari with that game. It ended up not being that big a deal, but it was kind of goofy. But yeah, I actually didn't get into coding until much, much later. Around like mid high school, that's when I took a course. I took the computer science course, and they taught us C. But there was a huge gap where I wasn't really doing any coding, but I was always really into board games, and I just played a ton of board games and did a lot of reading. Like not reading, but like puzzle books and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, at least between us, is pretty similar. And I actually think that's a common thing, which is there's a certain maturity, a certain amount of breadth of skills you need to have before you can sit down and right? We've talked about this on the program, but like write computers, so like write computer programs. So if you say, I want to build a 3D graphics game, well, you're going to have to know like enough trigonometry and geometry to be able to do like 3D computation. That's pretty high bar, actually.
Yeah.
And so like that's really tough. But having a kid be introduced to like late elementary, middle school, so I guess for people not in the States, that'd be like, 10 years old. I think you can start to introduce kids into like what loops are and printing your name. But I don't think they're going to engage at the level of building large amounts of software because I think it just takes focus. Now, of course, it could be an exception where like you probably don't need any help and you become like a contributor to Linux kernel at like 10, sure.
Yeah, there's always like savants.
Yeah, but I mean, I think for the most part, like teaching a kid to code, I think is about keeping them in that mindset of like Jason was pointing out, breaking it, but trying to understand why it broke. If you just succeed by randomly trying, I don't find that doesn't seem like a good way to kind of progress. So now it's not that there aren't times when it's called for just like trying random things until it works. Like I know there's an off by one error here somewhere. But for the most part, thinking through the code and anticipating what it's going to do seems to benefit me more. And I think as Jason was pointing out, those are skills you learn by playing board games, by, doing, scientific pursuits and activities, and even the scientific method to some extent, right? Like predicting what's going to happen, trying to say, how would I test whether this is true or not? I think having those kinds of approaches are actually enormously beneficial. And so when you say, kind of teaching kids to program or teaching kids to code, I actually think it's about not so much what language do you teach them, but about these kind of underlying concepts. Getting into the intricacies of a type system is probably not super engaging to a 9-year-old.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I think another sort of like line to walk, one thing where it gets kind of difficult is you want to sort of help, but then you can't help too much.
Yes.
So it's like sometimes we had this game where you just build train tracks, and then you could put a train down, the train goes on the tracks, and it's a simple idea. It's just like you're dragging tracks and you're laying them down on these tiles, but the thing is the tracks have to sort of line up, right? So I mean, if you had a train that was going, or a track that was going, let's say, west to east, you couldn't just put a track that's going south to north. Like you have to have one of the curvy tracks. Like it has to be contiguous, right? And we got this game like about a year or two ago. And so even my son was maybe like 3, and he just found it really frustrating. And, if I just left it like to do it, he just would have given up. But I stayed with him and I made the tracks and things like that. And so he couldn't really make any mistakes because I felt like it was just too far advanced. But then now he just does it on his own totally. So it's really hard to sort of strike that balance between like you want them to make mistakes, but then you don't want them to lose interest either or get really frustrated or whatever. That's, I think, with kids especially, it's like a very difficult line to walk. But yeah, I mean, I think that's true probably for anything, but especially something like coding. If you want to get them to something kind of like that's pretty advanced, it's really hard to have those stepping stones.
So if you have a kid who you think is ready to actually learn a programming language and sit at a computer and type and learn, what would you do? What language would you use? Would you do a web something? Would you do Python, non-web, like interactive? Like both of you and I described something that was, I mean, we're maybe a little predating the web, but this sort of interactive console graphics, getting used to how to deal with that. Not console graphics, but just like text input and back and forth. I mean, do you think that's the way to go?
No, I mean, so I actually, now that I remember, I totally forgotten about this until just now, but there was something, I think it was called like hypertext or something like that. But basically it was meant for presentations. Think of it as like basically PowerPoint, but there was sort of logic. So like in PowerPoint, you can have animations, you press the button and, you go to the next slide, but it actually just slides in some text and things like that. So this was like, it was actually meant for giving really interesting kind of kiosk type presentations, like interactive presentations. And so it had some very basic branching and things like that. But the nice thing about it was all graphical. I mean, think of like just PowerPoint.
Okay.
You're not writing any code or anything. And so I think something like that. So we actually have something called a Kodi, Kodi, and it has this graphical programming language where you just kind of drag and drop little modules and stitch them together. I feel like that's probably the best way to start. I probably wouldn't start by typing on the keyboard, especially nowadays with iPads and all of that.
Sure. So I've tried these, like, there's some coding games, and I've had my kids play those on the iPad where you tell a person, right, jump, right, and those look pretty good. And I know Apple made these Swift playgrounds, which I tried. I thought they were kind of interesting. But they're still a little premature for kids, but I think those seem really well done. And I think actually, like, as goofy as it sounds, having something where there's graphical interaction and also like good documentation. So it's well thought through what's supposed to happen, because a lot of times when I would do examples or coding questions, there's enough ambiguity where there's frustration about what you're supposed to do to progress forward.
Yep. Yeah. I played one, my son and I played one on the iPad called Codable. And basically you're this little fuzzball, and it's basically like turtle graphics. So you say, go right, go up, go right, go up. You have to kind of plan it all in advance. And then when you hit go, it executes that. And then you can kind of see like, oh, shoot, I wasn't supposed to go up twice or whatever. But yeah, I think those games are really where it's at. I would probably stay away from, as Patrick said, like, as soon as you get into real coding, you have to do a lot of reading. And even if you're, even once, our kids could read, at adult level and all that, it's still pretty taxing. Until you become a teenager, it's probably pretty exhausting to read, because you have to really think hard about it. It's not like as unconscious as it is for, an adult. And so a lot of these graphical things are really the way to go. But I guess like the high level here is is just to like get kids into logic. So there's there's these board games, that teach like strategy and all of that. There's these apps, there's visual programming languages, and they all kind of teach the basics around sort of logic, around understanding sort of cause and effect. Like, did you lose 3 times in a row, just randomness? Like if you're playing Chutes and Ladders and you lose, you can't really say, oh, I wish I could have done things differently. But even just knowing and understanding that the game is just complete random, that by in and of itself is a good lesson. Like just understanding that, you're following this process, but you have no control. It's really just about understanding the game versus, I don't know, Monopoly or something where you have a lot of control. There's a lot of things you can do, and the things you do matter. I think that getting kids to understand that is really important.
That makes sense. Yeah, I guess this wasn't so much a like strict curriculum on how to teach kids to code, but I'm not sure that one exists.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, and where we live, we've talked about this. Patrick and I live in the Valley, and the I don't know about you, but we have so many of these coding camps in my neighborhood. There's literally 8 coding camps on this one street. So if I go, a couple blocks from my house, it puts me on this pretty main road, and there's 8 coding camps. And I just don't. Yeah, I think that's not the way to go. I mean, I think it's one of these things that it's a deceptive goal. Like if you start marching towards the goal, I don't think you actually get there. I think actually you could sort of stint the growth. I feel like the coding really comes like after someone has already understood a lot more fundamental stuff. And of course, there's always savants who made their first app when they're 12 years old and things like that. But I think in general, like, jumping straight into Python or something like that might actually distract from the overall goal, which is really to build a foundation in like logic and causality.
I think I agree.
Yeah. So if anyone has any cool resources, so just to recap real quick, I think board games are really solid. I think there's a bunch of really cool apps. There's all sorts of visual programming languages. Just to list a few, I mean, there's Scratch, there's Logo. There's an app called Scratch Junior, which is like a limited version of Scratch. But you can find out if you look up visual programming languages for kids, you'll find a ton of these in every possible conceivable OS. And then you want to balance between being frustrated and just giving away all the answers, right? So as a parent, that's a challenge. As a guardian, that's a challenge. But yeah, I think that's basically the high level of it, and don't just hand a 5-year-old a C book because that's not gonna work.
Well, maybe do it one time to see if you have a savant, and then don't.
Yeah, I mean, if they ask you, if they say, hey, this is pretty cool, but I really want to learn assembly, well then, go for it.
Yeah.
Oh, the other thing, actually, just one other thing I thought of is, I've been doing, and I think you also fit this category, we do a lot of robotic stuff. And in general, if you do anything related to coding or anything related to, I don't know, building anything, yeah, just find a way to get your kids involved. I've been doing a lot of robotics things, and, my son's doesn't have the attention span for it. But what I did is I got a buddy of mine to do it too. And so when there's two of us and two kids, then it's like, the kids can kind of chase each other a bit, or, when they do pay attention, we're there. Or we could take turns. Like I can keep the two kids from, stepping on nails while, my friend does some work on the robot, and then we can switch. So that also worked out pretty well. But yeah, did your dad ever get you involved in any of his side projects or anything like that?
So my dad never really had side projects like that, but I mean, when we would do science fair each year or whatever, I don't know if that's at all a thing, but we would have to do a science project, and he would always get involved with us in doing those experiments and helping us. And yeah, I guess we did do stuff sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah, my dad, did a lot of, he's a mechanical, engineer, so he did a lot of mechanical stuff, and he'd always have me help him set up pulleys and stuff like that in the house.
Wait, set up pulleys in the house? That sounds like
yeah, I mean in the garage. But yeah, he literally had this whole pulley system, and yeah, it's pretty wild. I mean, he would be able to pull boats. He had boats just attached to the roof of the ceiling of the garage. So you would just park the car under a huge boat, and there was this crazy pulley system which gives you all this mechanical advantage, but you have to turn a winch 100 times to get this boat to go up 4 feet. So he just had all these crazy things.
That sounds pretty cool, actually. Do you have pictures? You guys seems like you guys have pictures.
Yeah, I gotta send you a picture of my dad's garage. I'll ask him to take a picture. We could put it on the blog.
There you go. You can be famous. Internet points.
That's right. Cool. Catch you later. The intro music is Axo by Binar Pilot. Programming Throwdown is distributed under a Creative Commons Attribution Share-alike 2.0 license. You're free to share, copy, distribute, transmit the work, to remix, adapt the work, but you must provide attribution to Patrick and I, and share alike in kind.